TutorHub. Today's lesson is about the difference between who and whom. So, who and whom are pronouns that refer to people. So, in this lesson, you will learn the use of who and whom in questions and in relative clauses. You will also learn the position of prepositions with who and whom. However, very important, before I start this lesson, you must understand that in practice, so in reality, whom is not used very often. In modern English, we often replace whom with who, but it is important for you to know what this means. It is important for you to know the official grammar rule of whom. But then you have to understand that in reality, it is not very common. Alright? So, let's start. Who and whom in questions. So, who acts as the subject of the question? Subject of a question. Example, who slapped you? So, who is the subject, slapped is the verb, and you is the object. Alright? Easy. Now, whom acts as the object of a question. It is the object. Alright? So, is the opposite. Whom did you slap? So, whom is the object of the question. You is now the subject of the question. So, the subject of the question. Remember, this is the person doing the action, doing the slapping, and slap is the verb. Alright? So, whom is always the object of, whom is always the object, and who is the subject. Alright? But remember what I said at the beginning of the lesson. Important. The use of whom is very old and formal. It's not very common. So, what do we do? Well, we also use who. We also use who as the object of a question. Alright? Again, we also use who as the object of the question. So, we replace whom with who. So, in modern English, we say, who did you slap? Because this is old and formal. Who did you slap? So, basically, who can act as the subject or object in modern English. Alright? So, if you see whom or hear whom, you know that is quite formal. Alright? It's quite formal. So, this is the object now here. Who is the object? You is the subject, and this is the verb, slapped. Alright? So, this is why this whom, this causes so much confusion to English students because it is not very common. So people wonder and don't really understand it. Alright? Now, let's look at some more examples. Who and whom in questions. So remember, who acts as a subject of a question. Alright? Example, who cooked this food? So we have the subject, verb, and the object. Who is using my cell phone? Who is the subject, is using is the verb, and my cell phone is the object. Very easy. Remember, whom acts as the object of a question in very formal English. Alright? Whom did you write a letter? So we have here you, subject, write, verb, and whom is the object. But remember, we don't really say this in modern English. In modern English, who acts as the object of a question. Who did you write a letter? Alright, so you is the subject, write is the verb, and who is the object. Alright? Now let's look whom and relative clauses. Let's start with the same sentence. Just a normal sentence, no clause. The manager was angry. So this is just the normal sentence. The manager was angry, main sentence. Now let's add another relative clause. The manager whom I called was angry. Whom I called. Alright? So, whom I called is the relative clause. And the word whom is also referring to the manager, object of the relative clause. So, whom is representing or referring to the manager, and it is the object of the relative clause. So, whom is the object? Whom is the object of this part? Whom is the object of this part in red? Whom I called. So, this is the object. When in referring to the manager. So, whom is the object to the relative clause. And I is the subject. And called is the verb. I called the manager and the manager is angry. So that's the meaning of the sentence. I am the person calling. I am the person doing the action. Alright? And whom, in terms of grammar and part of speech, is called the relative pronoun, and more specifically is the object of relative clause. So that is the other way that we use whom as part of the relative clause, and it is the object. But remember, this is not very common in modern English. So in modern English, we don't really use whom. We replace it with who. The manager who I called was angry. Alright? So we say, instead of saying this, the manager whom I called was angry. We usually say, the manager who I called was angry. So, who now becomes the object of the relative clause in modern everyday English. But it's still important that you know the real official grammar rule. Alright? It's important to know this, but then to realize that it is not very common. Let's look at some more examples of relative clauses. Reminder, who as a subject, relative pronoun. The boy who chased the dog is my friend. So, who chased the dog is the relative clause. Who is a relative pronoun and it is the subject because it's who chased, the subject of the verb chase, and the dog is the object. Alright? Easy. Reminder again, whom acts as an object relative pronoun in old formal English. The man whom I met yesterday has invited me for dinner. So, whom is an object, relative pronoun, and whom I met yesterday is the relative clause. And within the clause, I is the subject, met is the verb, and whom is representing the object, the man. I met the man yesterday and he has invited me for dinner. Alright? But remember, this is only rarely used in very traditional formal English. It's not very common in everyday English. In modern English, we prefer who as an object relative pronoun. So we say, the man who I met yesterday has invited me for dinner. WHO. Alright? So, I hope that it is clear for you for relative clauses. Now, advanced rule. The relative pronoun is optional when it is the object of the clause. So, optional means that it is not compulsory. Sometimes we can choose not to use it. So, let's look at an example when we use it. So, it is optional when it is the object of the clause. So, in formal English, we can say this. The manager whom I called was angry. Okay? That is in formal English. So, we can choose it's optional. We have chosen to use it. In modern English, we use who, and when it is the object, like here, it is optional. Here, we have chosen to use it. So, this is correct. The manager who I called was angry. This is correct in modern English. But since it is optional, we can choose not to use this relative pronoun, like this. The manager I called was angry, and that is perfectly correct. Yes? So, we don't write or say the relative pronoun. It's optional when it is only and when it is the object of the clause. That's very important. Only when it is the object. The relative pronoun is not optional when it is the subject of the clause. So this means that the relative pronoun is compulsory, we must use the relative pronoun when it is the subject of the clause. We cannot omit it. We cannot miss it out. So remember, we always use who as a subject of the clause. We write this: the manager who called me was angry. So this is correct and this is wrong. Here we have not used the relative pronoun and it is wrong. The manager called me was angry. Alright? Because it is not optional when it is the subject of the clause. So this is quite an advanced rule, but it is important. Now, what do we do with prepositions and what is the position of prepositions and the choice of who or whom? So that's the question. We have two choices. So choice number one, this is very formal. So when we have a preposition, then we have this form. We have the preposition immediately followed by whom. Alright? Example, I like the school with whom I teach. So with is a preposition and is immediately followed by the object, which is the object of the preposition, which is whom. Yes, with whom I teach. Okay, another example. To whom did he give the parcel? So we have the preposition to immediately followed by whom, and then did he give the parcel, and then question. So this is the object of the preposition. Remember that a preposition is always followed by a noun or pronoun, and it is the object of that preposition, and since whom is always the object, we use whom. But again, this is informal language, not very common. So in modern everyday English, we prefer choice number 2. So choice number 2, we don't use whom, we prefer who. So choice number 2, we use who and we put the preposition right at the end of the sentence. Yes? So goes right at end. So let's look at this. Let's look at these two examples using choice number 2. I like the school who I teach with. So we use who and we put the preposition at the end of the sentence. Okay? So here we have the subject, verb, preposition, and the object of the preposition actually goes before it. So it's quite a strange order of words, but this is how we say it in modern English. This is how we say it in modern English. Alright? And another example using choice number 2, modern English. So we use who and the preposition goes right at the end here. Who did he give the parcel to? So we have who, and then did he give the parcel? Did he give the parcel to? So he is the subject, give is the verb. Give is the verb here. We have the preposition to right at the end of the sentence. And we have the object of the preposition here at the beginning. Alright? So those are the two choices that you have with the prepositions and who and whom. Alright? So guys, there we are. Don't forget to check out our website, englishtutorhub.com. There are lots of useful stuff. There are lots of useful stuff in there that you might be interested in. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts and questions. Love to hear from you. Thank you very much.